चरणारविन्दं श्रीराधिका माधवयोरपादा माधुर्यलीला गुणरूपनाम्नां प्रतिक्षणस्वादनलोलुपस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दं निकुञ्जयूयोरतिकेलिसेव्ये यायालिभिर्युक्तिरपेक्षणीया अतिवल्लभस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दं साक्षात् भवितेन समस्तशास्त्रे उक्तस्तथा भाव्यत एव सद्भिः किन्तु प्रभोर्यः प्रिय एव तस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दं यस्य प्रसादात् भगवत्प्रसादो यस्य अप्रसादान्न गति कुतोऽपि ध्यायान्स्तुवांस्तस्य यशस्त्रिसन्ध्यं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दं नमः विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे संसार दावानललिडलोक गणाय कारुण्य घन घन प्रप्तस्य कल्याण गुणार्णवस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दं महाप्रभो कीर्तन नृत्यगीता वादित्रमाद्यान् मनसो रसेन रोमाञ्चकं पाश्रुतरङ्गभाजो वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दं श्रीविग्रहाराधन नित्यनाना शृङ्गारतन्मन्दिरमार्जनादो युक्तस्य भक्तांश्च नियुञ्जतोऽपि वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दं चतुर्विधा श्रीभगवत्प्रसाद स्वाद्वनतृप्तं हरिभक्तसङ्गं कृत्वैव तृप्तिं भजत सदैव वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दं श्रीराधिका माधवयोरपारा माधुर्यलीला गुणरूपनाम्नां प्रतिक्षणस्वादनलोलुपस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दं निकुञ्जयूनो रतिकेलिसेध्ये याया ज्ञालिभिर्युक्तिरपेक्षणीया तत्र दिदाक्ष अतिवल्लभस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दम् साक्षाद्धरित्वेन समस्तशास्त्रे उक्तस्तथा भाव्यत एव सर्वे किन्तु प्रभो यः प्रिय एव तस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दम् यस्य प्रसादात् भगवत्प्रसादो यस्य अप्रसादात् न गति कुतोऽपि ध्यायं स्तुवं तस्य यशस्त्रिसन्ध्यं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दम् नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद नमस्ते नरसिंहाय प्रहलाद दायिने हिरण्यकशिपुर्वक्षः शीलटङ्का नखालाये इतो नृसिंह परतो नृसिंहो यतो यतो यामि ततो नृसिंह बहे नृसिंहो हृदये नृसिंहो नृसिंहमादिं शरणं प्रपदे तव कर कमलवरे नाखम् अद्भुत शृङ्गम् दलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तानुभृङ्गम् केशवधृता नरहरिरूप जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय नृसिंहदेव 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 जय नृसिंहदेव जय प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज श्री शिव नृसिंहदेव नमस्ते नरसिंहाय प्रहलाद दायिने हिरण्यकशिपुर्वक्षः शीलटङ्का नखालाये इतो नृसिंह परतो नृसिंहो यतो यतो यामि ततो नृसिंह बहे नृसिंहो हृदये नृसिंहो नृसिंहमादिं शरणं प्रपदये तव कर कमल नाकम अद्भुत श्रृंगम दलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृंगम केशवधृता नरहरि रूप जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय नरसिंहदेव 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 जय नरसिंहदेव जय प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज कृष्णदेव भगवान की जय वृंदाय तुलसी देव्याय प्रियाय केशवश्च च विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी सत्यवत्यै नमो नमः वृंदाय तुलसी देव्याय प्रियाय केशवश्च च विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी सत्यवत्यै नमो नमः वृंदाय तुलसी देव्याय प्रियाय केशवश्च च विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी सत्यवत्यै नमो नमः नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः राधा कृष्ण सेवा पाव अभिलाषी ये तो मार शरण तारा वांछा पूर्ण हो कृपा करी करो तारे वृंदावन वासी मोराया विलास विलास कुंजे दियो बास नयने हेरिबो सदा युगल रूप राशि निवेदना धरा सखीरनुगता करो सेवा अधिकार दिए करो निज दासी दीन कृष्ण दासे कय ए नमोरा होय श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदा न भासी तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः यानिकानि च पापानि ब्रह्मत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे यानिकानि च पापानि ब्रह्मत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे यानिकानि च पापानि ब्रह्मत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे श्रीमती तुलसी महारानी की जय।
You go to my get 11.
Okay, liberation from the illusion.
Yes, chapter 2.
Chapter 3. Text 5, chapter 3.
Read from Shloka 1,
Okay.
chapter 3.
Okay. Guru Maharaj today, Hegriva Prabhu will give the class. Chapter 3, Liberation from the Illusory Energy, Text 1. Translation. King Nimi said, now we wish to learn about the illusory potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Sri Vishnu, which bewilders even great mystics. My lords, please speak to us about this subject. Purport. According to Srila Sridhar Swami, in this chapter, various saintly sons of Rishabdev will speak about illusory energy, Maya, the means for crossing beyond it, the characteristics of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the prescribed duties for human beings. The 48th verse of the previous chapter stated, Vishnur Mayayam Idam Pashyam. A devotee of Krishna should see the entire universe to be the illusory potency of the Lord. Therefore, King Nimi is now pursuing this subject matter by requesting more detailed information from the saintly Yogendras. According to Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the demigods headed by Lord Brahma and the human beings on the earth are all driven by their particular desire for material sense gratification. Thus, they direct their senses towards search for material knowledge. Thus, they direct their senses toward the search for material knowledge. The subtle celestial sense of the demigods and the gross senses of the human being are all busy in ascertaining the measurements of material sense object. To understand fully the actual nature of Maya, the illusory potency which causes the conditioned soul to become averse to Krishna consciousness and surrender to bewildering material manifestation, King Nimi is inquiring from another of the 9 Yogendra, Shri Antariksha. Text 2. Translation. Although I am drinking the nectar of your statements about the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, thus my thirst is not yet satiated. Such nectarian descriptions of the Lord and His devotees are the actual medicine for conditioned soul like me, who are tormented by the threefold miseries of material existence. Purport. According to Srila Sridhar Swami, one may argue that since the symptoms of a pure devotee of the Lord have already been elaborately described, one can perfect his life by advancing to the platform mentioned in the previous verses. And there is no need for further questions. But Hari Kathamritam, topics about the Lord and His devotees, are so pleasing and beautiful that one cannot give up hearing them, even after spiritual liberation. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in this connection has quoted the following verse, Atmarasam cha manushya nirvridha apya ukrkarme. Quote, those who are self-satisfied and unattracted by external material desires are also attracted to the loving service of Sri Krishna, whose qualities are transcendental and whose activities are wonderful. Hari, the personality of Godhead, is called Krishna because he has such transcendentally attractive feature. Srimad Bhagavatam 1.7.10. Material medicine is not desirable once a disease has been cured. But on the absolute platform, the means and the end are not different. So chanting and hearing the glories of Lord Krishna are both the mean and the end of transcendental bliss. King Nimi said to the sages, quote, you are all great saintly persons absorbed in the love of Godhead. Therefore, although you will speak about Maya or illusion, The conclusion will undoubtedly be Krishna consciousness. Please don't think that you have already explained everything to me. The intoxicating nectar of your instruction has left me more eager than ever to hear about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Unquote. King Nimi was also a great devotee of Lord. Otherwise, there would have been no question of his personally conversing with such exalted living entities as the nine Yogendras. But as the humble Vaishnava, he considered himself as an ordinary conditioned soul covered by material designations. Thus, he showed his eagerness to understand the actual nature of Maya in order to be safe from her attempt to place him in the burning fire of material existence. Text 3. Translation. Shri Antariksha said, O mighty armed king, by activating the material elements, the primeval soul of all creation has sent forth all living being in higher and lower species so that these conditioned soul can cultivate either sense gratification or ultimate liberation according to their desire. Purport. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the illusory energy Maya is explained in this verse through a description of her potencies, namely the modes of material natures. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna has described Maya sa gunmayi.
Just 1 minute. Just 1 minute. शाम को
आज
देखा वो पब्लिकेशन का हमने बोला था रिपोर्ट किया
इन लोगों के पास में होगा जो ऑर्गेनाइज किया ना पूरा रिपोर्टिंग
मैंने नहीं किया
मैंने किया था
मेरी
According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the illusory energy Maya is explained in this verse through the description of her potencies, namely the modes of material nature. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna has described Maya as Gunmayi, consisting of material modes of nature. The material modes of nature are alluded to in this verse by the word Uchchavavani, high and low species of life. Various species of life become manifest, as do varieties of beauty, ugliness, strength, weakness, and other characteristics within a particular species according to the proportionate development of the modes of nature. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 13.22, Karmanam Guna Sango Asya Sad Asad Yoni Janreshu. This is due to the living being's association with material nature in good and evil species. Similarly, we find this statement, Bhagavad Gita 14.18, Udram Gachanti Satvastha Madhyam Sthitam Rajasa Jagah Guna Vritti Asa Adho Gachanti Tamasa. Those situated in the modes of goodness gradually go upward to the higher planets. Those in the mode of passion live on the earthly planets, and those in the mode of ignorance go down to the hellish worlds. The three general divisions of material life are called Deva, Tiryat, and Nara, that is, demigod, subhuman creatures, and human beings. In the various species of life, there are various facilities for material sense gratification. Different species are distinguished by differently formed senses, such as genital, nostril, tongue, ear, nose, eyes. Pigeons, for example, are given the facility for almost unlimited sex. Bears have an ample opportunity for sleeping. Tigers and lions exhibit the propensities for fighting and meat eating. Horses are distinguished by their legs for swift running. Vultures and eagles have the eyesight, and so on. The human being is distinguished by a large brain, which is meant for understanding God. The phrase Swamatratama is very significant in this verse. The word Swa indicates possessions. All living beings belong to the Supreme Lord. Therefore, according to this verse, they have two options, Matra Parishadhai and Atma Parishadhai. Matra refers to material senses and Parishadhai refers to effective accomplishment. Therefore, Matra Parishadhaya means efficient engaging in sense gratification. On the other hand, Atma Parishadhaya refers to Krishna consciousness. There are two categories of Atma, the Jivatma or the ordinary living entity who is dependent, and the Paramatma, the supreme living entity who is independent. Some living entities desire to understand both categories of Atma, and in this verse the word Atma Parisadhaya indicates that the material world is created to give those living entities the opportunity to achieve such an understanding and thus return to kingdom of God where life is eternal and full of bliss and knowledge. Srila Sridhar Swami confirms this by quoting a verse from the
Go to the next one.
text 4 translation. The super soul enters the material body of created being, activates the mind and senses, and thus causes the conditioned soul to approach the three modes of material nature for sense gratification. Purport. The following is the summary of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati's Thakur commentary on this verse. The one super soul enters the gross material element, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and uses the activated material mind to subtly divide the sensory activities of the conditioned soul among the five knowledge acquiring senses, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, skin, and by further gross division, the five working senses, the hand, legs, speech, genital, anus. Because liberated souls have a strong tendency to serve the Lord, they are not attracted by the dualities of material good and evil. They derive their pleasure through devotion and love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who eternally enjoys his own transcendental pastime beyond the material manifestation. When the conditioned souls forget their loving relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they develop illicit desires. Therefore, unable to serve the form, taste, fragrance, and other aspects of Lord Vishnu, these souls become bound to the bitter fruits of fruitive activities. But if their love of Godhead is somehow or other awakened, the conditioned soul can devote all their sensory activities in the service of the Lord's transcendental pastime. Actually, all materialistic activities are most undesirable. But the conditioned soul, under the influence of illusion, sees apparent distinctions between good and bad, pleasing and displeasing, and so on. The Lord, the super soul, having entered the collective and individual consciousness of the living entity, knows the heart of everyone. Therefore, when a sincere soul aspires for spiritual perfection, the Lord frees him from the material bondage and arouses his propensity to serve the Lord of Vaikuntha. Love of Godhead flourishes in the variegated flavors of transcendental enjoyment. In ignorance, however, the conditioned soul considered himself the proper object of service and thus misunderstand the entire existential situation. Text 5. Translation. The individual living being, the master of the material body, uses his material senses, which have been activated by super soul, to try to enjoy sense objects composed of three modes of nature. Thus, he misidentified the created material body with the unborn eternal self and becomes entangled in the illusory energy of the Lord. Purport. In this verse, the living entity is called Prabhu or Master because he is a minute part and parcel of Supreme Master Krishna. Similarly, in Bhagavad Gita 15.8, the Lord has described the living entity as Ishvaraha, the controller. Shariram yad abhupunoti yad chape utraka mishtit sarvaha. Quote, the living entity in the material world carries his various conceptions of life from one body to another as the air carries aroma. Srila Prabhupada has commented in this purport, quote, Here the living entity is described as Ishvara, the controller of his own body. If he likes, he can change his body to the higher grade, and if he likes, he can move to the lower class. Minute independence is there. The change his body undergoes depend upon him. Unquote. The statement confirms the word Swamatra and Atma Parishadhai in text 3 of this chapter. If the Supreme Lord were to interfere with the minute independence of the living entity, there would be no question of living entities engaging in the loving service of the Lord, since love implies a spontaneous free choice by the lover. Here the word Prabhu indicates that just as a child having received a toy car from his father paddle on the sidewalk imitating the father who drives an actual car, the living entity paddles around the material universe in the innumerable material bodies selected for him by the Supreme Lord from the assortment of
Go to the next one.
text 6 translation. Impelled by deep-rooted material desire, the embodied living entity engages his active sense organs in creative activities. He then experiences the result of his material actions by wandering throughout this world in so-called happiness and distress. Purport. The argument may be given that if a living entity were subject to the results of his previous activities, there would be no scope for free will. Once having committed a sinful action, the living entity would be bound in an endless chain of suffering, being perpetually subject to previous reactions. According to this speculation, there cannot be just an omniscient God, since the living entity is forced to commit sinful activities by the reaction of his previous activities, which were reactions to still previous activities. Since even an ordinary gentleman will not unfairly punish an innocent person, how could there be a God witnessing the helpless suffering of the conditioned soul within this world? This foolish argument can easily be refuted by a practical example. If I purchase a ticket for an airline flight, board the plane and commence the flight, once the plane has taken off, my decision to board the plane forces me to continue flying until the plane lands. But although I am forced to accept the reactions of this decision on board the plane, I have many new decisions I can make. I may accept the food and drink from the stewardess or reject it. I may read a magazine or newspaper. I may sleep, walk up and down the alley, converse with other passengers, and so on. In other words, although the general context, flying to a particular city, is forcibly imposed upon me as a reaction to my previous decision to board the plane, even within that situation, I am constantly making new decisions and creating new reactions. For example, if I cause a disturbance on the airplane, I may be arrested when the plane lands. On the other hand, if I make friends with the businessman sitting next to me on the plane, such a contact may lead to favorable business transaction in the future. Similarly, although the living entity is forced to accept a particular body by the laws of karma, within the human form of life, there is always scope for free will and decision making. Therefore, the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot be considered unjust for holding the living entity in the human life responsible for his present activities, despite the living entities undergoing the reactions of his previous work. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the influence of Maya is so strong that even in the hellish condition, the proud conditioned soul thinks that he is enjoying life. Text 7 translation. Thus, the conditioned living entity is forced to experience repeated birth and death. Impelled by the reactions to his own activities, he helplessly wanders from one inauspicious situation to another, suffering from one moment of creation until the time of cosmic annihilation. Purport. According to Srila Madhvacharya,
Need a translation again.
translation. Thus, the conditioned living entity is forced to experience repeated birth and death. Impelled by the reactions of his own activities, he helplessly wanders from one inauspicious situation to another, suffering from the moment of creation until the time of cosmic annihilation. Purport. According to Srila Madhvacharya, after hearing that the living entity is repeatedly subjected to birth and death within the material world,
Above.
if one still considers such a helpless entity equal to God in all respect, one will surely fall into the darkest region of the universe from which it is difficult to rise. Text 8. Translation. When the annihilation of the material element is imminent, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his form of eternal time, withdraws the manifest cosmos, consisting of gross and subtle features, and the entire universe vanishes into non-manifestation. Purport. In the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Kapildev teaches that the material nature originally exists in an inert state of equilibrium called Pradhan. When Lord Vishnu cast his potent glance in the form of a kal or time, material interaction takes place, culminating in the variegated creation of material cosmos. In this verse, it is stated that at the end of universal time, the same kal that originally incited the female nature into manifested again. In this verse, it is stated that at the end of the universal time, the same kal that originally incited the female nature into manifestation again withdraws the cosmos into its original state of inert non-manifestation. According to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the time potency itself, kal, is then withdrawn and it merges into the Supreme Soul who manifests himself as the original cause of material nature. Such technical arrangements for creation and annihilation, birth and death do not exist in the eternal spiritual kingdom of God. In the spiritual sky, the variegated spiritual enjoyment of the Lord and his devotee is not hampered by the inferior cycle of birth, maintenance, destruction found in the material world. Text 9. Translation. As cosmic annihilation approaches, a terrible drought takes place on earth for 100 years. For 100 years, the heat of the sun gradually increases and its blazing heat begins to torment the three worlds. Text 10. Translation. Beginning from Patala Loka, the fire grows, emanating from the mouth of Lord Sankarsana, its flame shooting upward, driven by great wind, it scorches everything in all directions. Text 11. Hordes of cloud called Samvartaka pour torrent of rain for 100 years, flooding down in raindrop as long as a trunk of an elephant. That deadly rainfall submerges the entire universe in the water. Text 12. Then Vairaja Brahma, the soul of the universal form, gives up his universal body, O king, and enters into the subtle unmanifest nature like a fire that has run out of fuel. Purport. According to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the word Vairajaha in this verse indicate the totality of individual conditioned soul who originally take birth from Brahma and amalgamated back into him at the time of annihilation. By the manifestation of Virat Purusha, the universal form of the Lord, there is a temporary display of forms, qualities, and activities within the material creation. But the entire cosmic scene reverts to inert formlessness when the creation is withdrawn by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the Lord's universal form cannot be accepted as an eternal form of the Lord. It is merely a temporary imaginary resemblance of his personal form within the kingdom of Maya. In the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, as well as in the second canto, the universal form of the Lord is clearly explained to be imaginary form offered to the neophyte for meditation on God. Those who are excessively materialistic and are totally unable to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead Supreme Personality of Godhead is actually Satchidananda Vigraha, or eternal form of bliss and knowledge transcendental to the exhibition of material energy. Therefore, to encourage such gross materialists to become faithful theists, the Vedic literature instructs them to meditate upon the physical universe as a gigantic body of the Supreme Lord. This pantheistic conception does not reflect the ultimate reality of the Supreme Lord, but is a technique to bring the mind gradually toward God. Srila Sridhar Swami has quoted the following verse as the evidence that the Lord Brahma is supposed to go back to God at the time of annihilation. Brahmana sahate sarve sampraparte pratishanchare. Quote, at the time of final annihilation, all self-realized soul enter with Brahma into the supreme abode. Since Brahma is sometimes considered the best devotee of the Supreme Lord, he surely should obtain liberation rather than merely entering into the unmanifest state of material nature called Avyakta. In this connection, Srila Sridhar Swami points out that there is a class of non-devotee who attain the planet of Brahma by performing Ashwamedh Yajna and other sacrifices, and in certain cases Brahma himself may not be a devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the word Avyaktam Vashite Sukshmam can be understood to indicate that such a non-devotee Brahma cannot enter the spiritual sky despite having achieved the ultimate universal status of material expertise. When Brahma is a devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the word Avyaktam can be taken to indicate the spiritual sky. Since the spiritual sky is not manifest to the conditioned soul, it may also be considered Avyakta. If even Lord Brahma cannot enter the kingdom of God without surrendering to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then what to speak of others, so-called pious and expert non-devotees? In this regard, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has pointed out that there are three categories within the status of Brahma, namely those of Karmi, Jnani and devotees. The Brahma, who is the most exalted Karmi of the universe, will have to come back to the material world. A living entity who has achieved the post of Brahma by being the greatest speculative philosopher within the universe may attain impersonal liberation, and a living entity who has been awarded the post of Brahma due to being a great devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead enters into the personal abode of the Lord. In Srimad Bhagavatam 3.52.50, yet another case is described. A Brahma who is a devotee of the Lord but who has the tendency to think himself independent of or equal to Lord may achieve Mahavishnu's abode at the time of annihilation. But when creation begins again, he has to return again to take the post of Brahma. The word used in this case is Abhed Drishtaya, which refers to tendency to think oneself independently powerful. The various designations possible for such an exalted living entity as a Lord Brahma definitely proves that any material position is worthless for guaranteeing an eternal life of bliss and knowledge. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna promises that if one gives up all other so-called obligations and surrender to the devotional service of the Lord will personally protect him and bring him back to the supreme abode in the spiritual sky. It is futile and foolish to try to achieve perfection by one's own strenuous endeavor and not surrender to the lotus feet of Krishna. Such an blind attempt is described in the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita as Bahula Sayam, indicating that it is a work in the material mode of passion. Brahma is the Lord of passion, and his creation and management of entire universe are certainly Bahula Sayam, or strenuous endeavor in the most exalted senses. But all such compassionate work, even that of Lord Brahma, is ultimately useless without surrendering to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Text 13. Translation. Deprived of its quality of aroma by wind, the element earth is transformed into water. The water, deprived of its taste by that same wind, is merged into fire. Purport. Srimad Bhagavatam gives several descriptions of material creation by which the air is expanded from ether, fire from air, water from fire, the earth from water. However, in the reverse order, the creation is bound up. Thus, earth merges back into the water from which it came, and water similarly merges into fire. Text 14. Translation. Fire, deprived of its form by darkness, dissolves into the element air. When the air loses its quality by the touch of influence of space, the air merged into that space. When space is deprived of its tangible quality by the Supreme Soul in the form of time, space merges into false ego in the mode of ignorance. Text 15. Translation. My dear king, the material senses and intelligence merge into false ego in the mode of passion, from which they arose, and the mind, along with the demigod, merges into false ego in the mode of goodness. Then the total false ego, along with all its qualities, merges into Mahat-Tattva. Text 16. I have now described Maya, the illusory energy of Supreme Personality of Godhead. This illusory potency, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is empowered by the Lord of the creation, empowered by the Lord for the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of the material universe. Now, what more do you wish to hear? Purport. King Nini has expressed to the Navyogendra his fear of the illusory potency of the Lord and had requested a detailed explanation of Maya so that he could avoid becoming a victim at her hand. Now, Shri Antariksha, having described the illusionary potency, is suggesting that the king inquires about the means to become totally free from Maya's influence. Not waiting for the king to ask such a question, Shri Antariksha himself is suggesting, now that you have heard about Maya's influence, you should inquire about the process of becoming free from such influence. According to Srimad Swami, that is the significance of Shri Antariksha question. Kim Yoham Chetan Ichhati. What more do you wish to hear? The following is the summary of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur's explanation of the process of revelation described in the previous verses. Vasudev, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the presiding deity of consciousness, which become manifest within the Mahat-Tattva. By further manifestation of Mahatattva, the three modes of ego appear as follows. Number one, from Vakarika, false ego in the mode of goodness, appeared the 11 senses. The mind whose presiding deity is Anuruddha. Second, from Tejasa, false ego in the form of passion, comes intelligence whose presiding deity is Pradyumna, and the 5 working senses and the 5 knowledge acquiring senses with their various presiding deities. Third, from false ego in the mode of ignorance arises the subtle form of sound, and from that sound or shabda, all the material elements gradually become manifest, beginning with ether and the senses of hearing. The presiding deity of these 3 divisions of false ego is Sankarshana. This description is taken from chapter 26 of the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, verses 21, 27, 28, 30, 31, 32 and 35. The Supreme Personality of Godhead's external potency, Maya, causes the birth, maintenance and destruction of the material world. She is tricolored red, white and black. In her red feature, the material nature is created. In white, it is endures, and in black, it is annihilated. The Mahat Tattva arises from the Maya, and from the Mahat Tattva come the 3 varieties of false ego mentioned above. At the time of annihilation, the 5 great elements, namely the earth, water, fire, air, ether, merge into the false ego in the mode of ignorance from which they were originally generated. The 10 senses and the intelligence merge into the false ego in passion, and the mind along with the demigod merges into false ego in the mode of goodness, which then merges into Mahat Tattva, which further takes shelter of Prakriti or unmanifested Pradhana. As described above, each of the gross element is bound up when its distinguishing quality is removed. The element then merges into the previous element. This can be understood as follows. In space or either there is quality of sound. In air there are qualities of sound and touch. The fire there are sound, touch and form. In water there are sound, touch, form and taste. And in earth there are sound, touch, form, taste and aroma. Therefore, from either down to earth, each element is distinguished by the addition of its own unique quality called Guna Vishesham. When that quality is removed, an element becomes non-different from its previous element and thus merges into it. For example, when great wind takes aroma away from earth contains only sound, touch, form and taste and thus become non-different from water into which it merges. Similarly, when the water loses its rasa or taste, it contains only sound, touch and form, thus becoming non-different from fire, which also contains those 3 qualities. So the wind takes away aroma to merge earth into water and takes away taste to merge water into fire. Then, when the universe darkness removes form from fire, fire merges into air. Space then removes the sense of touch from air and air merges into space. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, as the time element, removes sound from space and space then merges into false ego in the mode of ignorance. From which it arose. Finally, false ego is merged into Mahat Tattva, which is merged into unmanifested Pradhan, and thus the universe is annihilated. Text 17. Translation. King Nimi said, O great sage, please explain how even a foolish materialist can easily cross over the illusory energy of Supreme Lord. which is always insurmountable for those who are not self-controlled. Purport. According to Srila Sridhar Swami, Sthula Dhyaya indicate that those who are ignorantly identifying themselves with the gross material body and who are therefore unable to analyze the subtle form of nature by which the soul transmigrates in illusion. Srila Jiva Goswami commented that Sthula Dhyaya also indicates so-called pious person who execute pompous religious ceremonies for material sense enjoyment, rather than trying to prepare themselves to go back home, back to Godhead, by engaging in the living devotional service of the Lord. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, King Nimi was already an advanced devotee of the Lord and therefore knew that one can cross over the illusory energy Maya by surrendering to the lotus feet of the Lord and pleasing him by pure devotional service. Therefore, the king was asking the question for the benefit of those who falsely consider themselves very much learned but in fact are addicted to material fruitive activities, which increasingly entangle them into illusion. In this regard, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has quoted from Amar Kosha dictionary to show that Akritamabhi indicates Apurvanatam, or one whose life is empty. Every living being has an eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. One may love Krishna by thinking of him as one's eternal master, one's most intimate friend.
तो यहाँ stop रहो. हो जाता है. Thank you.
स्वर्ग को बहुत पहले ही कुछ समझ चुके थे। तो स्वर्गाय लोकाय एक शब्द है, इसका अर्थ है कि स्वर्ग में जो जिनकी कीर्ति गाई जाती है, ऐसे भगवान विष्णु के धाम प्राप्ति के लिए, उनके चरण कमल की प्राप्ति के लिए वे लोग 1 सहस्र वर्ष तक चलने वाला यज्ञ प्रारंभ किए थे। नैमिषारण्य से भागवत की कथा प्रारंभ होती है। नैमिषारण्य यहाँ से बहुत दूर नहीं है। उसको नैमिष क्यों कहते हैं, इसके विषय में एक कथा है वायु पुराण में कि ब्रह्मा जी से एक बार ऋषियों ने पूछा कि कौन सा ऐसा पवित्र स्थान है जहाँ कोई विघ्न न हो और हम लोग तपस्या करना चाहते हैं, यज्ञ करना चाहते हैं, स्थान बताइए। तो ब्रह्मा जी ने एक मनोमय चक्र बनाया ऋषियों और देवताओं के सामने, मनोमय चक्र, और उस चक्र को उन्होंने छोड़ा और कहा कि जिस स्थान पर इसकी नैनी का भार प्रांत भाग शीर्ण हो जाएगा, तो उस स्थान को समझना कि यज्ञ के लिए, तपस्या के लिए पवित्र स्थान। तो ब्रह्मा जी ने जब मनोमय चक्र छोड़ा तो ऋषि लोग उस चक्र के पीछे पीछे चले। तो वह चक्र उसी नैमिष नामक वन में, तो पहले से जो नाम रहा हो उस वन में आकर के शीर्ण हो गया, उसका नैमिष शीर्ण हो गया, धार खत्म हो गई। वहीं पर गिरा जहाँ चक्र तीर्थ है, तो यहाँ भी पानी नीचे से आता रहता है, तो चक्र तीर्थ का, तो चक्र की धुरी शीर्ण हो गई। वास्तव मनोमय चक्र था, इसका मतलब मन वहां आकर के शांत स्थान। तो ईश्वर ने निश्चय किया कि यह स्थान परम पावन है और वास्तव में पहले से ही भगवान विष्णु का क्षेत्र है। जैसे ऋषियों ने आगे भी कहा है कि कलिम आगत माँ क्या क्षेत्र श्री वैष्णव भजन, हम लोग कलयुग को आया हुआ जहाँ पर इस वैष्णव क्षेत्र में भगवान विष्णु के धाम में शरण लिए। तो अनिमिष क्षेत्र का अर्थ है, और निमिष का अर्थ होता है पलक पे गिरना। पलक जब गिरती है, जितने समय तक नेत्र बंद होते हैं, पलक गिरने पर चाहे 1 सेकेंड 2 सेकेंड जो भी, तो इसको निमिष कहते हैं, निमिष। और तो इस संसार में देखा जाता है कि निमिष गिरता है मनुष्यों का, रात में तो पूरा बंद हो जाता है, सोता है आदमी, और बीच में पलक गिरता रहता है, उठता रहता है। इसका अर्थ है कि लुप्त दृष्टि होता है जीव, मनुष्य, उसकी दृष्टि लुप्त हो जाती है उस काल में। पर भगवान विश्व, जो इस विश्व के परमेश्वर हैं, वो अलुप्त दृष्टि कहे जाते हैं। कभी भी उनकी दृष्टि बंद नहीं होती, मतलब ज्ञान पूरा बना रहता है, सदा वो सब कुछ देखते हैं। उनकी आंखें बंद भी रहती है, कारण समुद्र में या गर्भ समुद्र में सोते भी हैं, फिर भी सब कुछ देखते रहते हैं, भविष्य वर्तमान सब। इसीलिए उनको अनिमिष कहा गया। भगवान का एक नाम है अनिमिष, और तस्य क्षेत्र नैमिष। तो ऐसे अलुप्त दृष्टि सर्वज्ञ भगवान विष्णु के क्षेत्र में, धाम में, सौनकादि ऋषि जन एक बार जुटे थे। ऋषय मंत्र दृष्ट, ऋषि का अर्थ है जो वेदों के मंत्रों को, श्लोकों को ठीक से जानते हैं, भगवान के भक्त। ऐसे ऋषि जुटे थे, कितनी संख्या में वे थे भगवान के व्यास के लिए हम नहीं कह रहे हैं, लेकिन लोक मुख से, पता नहीं वेद से भी, पुराण से भी सिद्ध होगा, हमें तो नहीं पता है, लेकिन प्रचलित बात है कि 88,000 ऋषि जुटे थे। ऋषियों के नायक कुलपति। वैसे ऋषि जन नैमिषारण्य में जुटे थे। किस लिए? सहस्र सम सत्रम आसत, एक यज्ञ करने के लिए। जो यज्ञ सहस्र सम का अर्थ है वर्ष, 1000 वर्ष तक यज्ञ चलने वाला था। महाराज परीक्षित के परम धर्म भ्रमण के कुछ वर्ष के बाद ही ये यज्ञ चालू हुआ। 1 सहस्र वर्ष तक यज्ञ चलने वाला था। ऐसे सहस्र वर्ष व्यापी यज्ञ में ऋषि लोग बैठे। किस लिए यज्ञ कर रहे थे? इसका उत्तर देते हैं भगवान वेदव्यास, स्वर्गाय लोकाय, स्वर्ग में जिनकी कीर्ति गाई जाती है, ऐसे भगवान के चरण कमल की प्राप्ति के लिए, भगवान के धाम में जाने के लिए यज्ञ कर रहे थे। यज्ञ का उद्देश्य था भगवान के धाम में जाना। तो क्या ऋषियों को ये ज्ञान नहीं था कि ये यज्ञ भगवान का धाम प्राप्त नहीं कराएगा? ये प्रश्न होता है। बाद में क्या उनके बाद में ये बात समझ में आई कि यज्ञ नहीं करना चाहिए? पहले क्यों वो चालू कर दिए? कारण यह लिखा गया है, यज्ञ में हवन होता है, भोजन कराया जाता है और भगवत कीर्तन भी होता है, कथाएं भी होती हैं, लेकिन मुख्य होता है यज्ञ, हवन। तो ऋषियों ने इसलिए यज्ञ चालू किया था कि कोई न कोई महापुरुष, परम भागवत पुरुष इस यज्ञ में आएंगे और उनके आने पर हम लोग उनके मुख से कथा सुनेंगे, कृष्ण कथा सुनेंगे और इस यज्ञ को बंद कर देंगे। पहले से मन में था, पहले से उनके मन में बात थी। नहीं तो आप समझिए कि जो व्यक्ति पूरा कंप्लेंट छाप करके पूरे भारत में प्रचार करके अब यज्ञ चालू करे और किसी साधु के आने में बंद करेगा, ऐसा कभी नहीं हो सकता। तो पहले से ही उनके मन में था। यज्ञ एक बहाना था। यज्ञ में दीक्षा लेने पर, यज्ञ चालू करने पर उनको कोई कहता नहीं कि चलिए आश्रम सुना है या ये काम करना है या वो काम करना है, कोई कहता नहीं। यज्ञ में बैठे और यज्ञ में कोई न कोई महात्मा आएंगे, इस तरह से परम अधिकारी भगवत कथा के कृष्ण कथा प्रस्तुत करेंगे और उस यज्ञ में निश्चिंत हम लोग कथा सुने। यही आशय था। उसमें बहुत क्रियाएं करते थे, जैसे पढ़ाना, पढ़ना, यज्ञ करना, ये करना, वेद पढ़ना, कई तरह से। भगवान वेदव्यास देव कहते हैं कि 1 सहस्र वर्ष तक चलने वाला यज्ञ वे प्रारंभ किए थे। एक बार की बात है, तो एक बात मुने प्रातः होता है। एक समय की बात है, सूत गोस्वामी वहां आए, जो रोमहर्षण के पुत्र हैं। रोमहर्षण का वध कर दिया था भगवान बलराम जी ने। तो फिर बाद में ऋषियों की प्रार्थना से भगवान बलराम जी ने रोमहर्षण के पुत्र उग्रश्रवा जी को पुराण का अधिकारी बनाया और उनको बैठाया था कथा के लिए। एक प्रकार से उग्रश्रवा जी भगवान बलराम जी के प्रसाद उनकी डायरेक्ट कृपा। ऐसे उग्रश्रवा जी जब आए तो समस्त ऋषि बहुत प्रसन्न हुए, सौनक जी ने प्रधान किया और वे लोग गोस्वामी के गुणों को, भगवान के प्रति अटूट प्रेम और भगवान के कथा में, भगवान की कथा को प्रस्तुत करने की उनकी अद्भुत क्षमता वे सब जानते हैं। जैसे शुरू में ही लोग कहे, तो सूत गोस्वामी के गुणों का वर्णन ऋषियों के मुख से ही हुआ है। ऐसे सूत गोस्वामी के प्रति ऋषियों की बहुत श्रद्धा थी, बहुत श्रद्धा। वक्तव्य विषय में, शास्त्र में और उसको बोलने वाले गुरु में यदि दो में श्रद्धा रखता है तो निश्चित भगवत प्रेम प्राप्त कर लेता है। शास्त्र में और शास्त्र के वक्ता में पूरी श्रद्धा होनी चाहिए। भागवत में और भागवत बोलने वाले में इसको श्रद्धा कहते हैं। मैंने सनाने में एकत्रित बड़े बड़े ऋषि वास्तव में बहुत विद्वान थे और सौनक जी के लिए तो कहना ही नहीं, पर भगवान की कथा के प्रति उनकी बहुत श्रद्धा थी। श्रद्धा का अर्थ होता है लालसा, दृढ़ अनुराग, श्रद्धा का ही अर्थ होता है। श्रद्धा शब्द विश्वास करे, सुदृढ़ निश्चय, कृष्ण भक्ति करने सर्व कार्य, श्रद्धा का ही अर्थ होता है। ऋषियों की अद्भुत प्रगाढ़ श्रद्धा भगवान की कथा में थी। श्रद्धा का क्या मतलब है? श्रद्धा का मतलब ये है कि जीवन का यही एकमात्र लाभ है कृष्ण के विषय में सुनना, इसको श्रद्धा कहते हैं। और इसके आगे और कुछ भी नहीं है, किसी भी साधन में या शास्त्र में कोई तम नहीं है। शास्त्र वही सुनना है जिसमें भगवान श्री कृष्ण की गीता कथा है, घटना चरित्र दिया है। तो श्रीमद् भागवतम में या कृष्ण का वर्णन करने वाले किसी भी वैष्णव ग्रंथ में विश्वास हो, इस ग्रंथ को सुनना ही हमारे जीवन का एकमात्र लाभ है। यही साधन है, यही साध्य है, यही हमारी निधि है, यही हमारा सब कुछ है। इस प्रकार का विश्वास, इस प्रकार की श्रद्धा ऋषियों में थी कथा के प्रति। और कथा के वक्ता शुद्ध गोस्वामी में भी अपूर्व निष्ठा श्रद्धा थी। इसलिए उनके आने पर उन लोगों ने आपस में प्लान किया। अब कुछ दिन रहे शुद्ध गोस्वामी, दो चार दिन। एक दिन उन लोगों ने विचार किया यज्ञ बंद कर देना चाहिए। जिस दिन की प्रतीक्षा में 2 दिन आ गया और भगवान की कथा सुननी है शुद्ध गोस्वामी के मुख कमल से, उन्होंने यज्ञ बंद कर दिया। यहाँ तक कि प्रातः काल जल किए थे, हवन कर चुके थे, तो फिर से हवन किए। अथवा एक टीकाकार कहते हैं शाम को जो हवन किए थे तो फिर सवेरे हवन किए। इसका मतलब ये था कि वो दिखा रहे थे कि जल को 2 बार करके अब बंद किया जा रहा है। ध्यान से बंद करना चाहिए। प्रातः बुद्ध होता है हवन की हुई अग्नि में फिर से हवन किए। ये प्रातः काल कर दिए। तब करके हमने शुद्ध गोस्वामी से पक्ष पूछे इदम का तो पक्ष मान आगे 10 वर्षों में जो बात कही जा रही है उसको पूछा। बहुत श्रद्धा थी। 88,000 ऋषियों में कभी ऋषि ऐसा नहीं था जिसका मत सब बड़े धैर्य थे और भगवान के परम भक्त थे। गीता के अनुसार अब देखिए गीता के लास्ट में जो सर्वधर्मान परिचय जो शब्द कहा जा रहा है ये उच्चतम ज्ञान है और भगवान का जो प्रिय होता है वही ऐसा कर सकता है जिसके भगवान में प्रीति होती है। ऋषियों ने छोड़ दिया। वहाँ शुद्ध गोस्वामी से इस प्रकार कहने लगे। शुद्ध गोस्वामी से उन्होंने कहा कि हम कथा सुनना चाहते हैं, हमारी बस यही हमारा ये उद्देश्य रहा है। आप आगे बड़े भाग्य से, हमारा भाग्य है। तो शुद्ध गोस्वामी ने मानो कहा, भक्त कथा कह रहे थे वृंदावन में साथ रूप है, तो कह रहे थे। शुद्ध गोस्वामी ने कहा कि नहीं आप लोग यज्ञ चालू किए हैं, यज्ञ कीजिए। उन्होंने जानना चाहा कि कुछ ऋषियों का मत क्या है कि यज्ञ चालू रखना चाहिए। तो शुद्ध गोस्वामी ने कहा भाई आप लोग यज्ञ कर रहे हैं, आप लोगों का कहाँ फुर्सत है। तब तक तो 2-4 साल थे और बाल्टी में पानी ले लेकर कुंड में डाल बुझा दी। अब आपको विश्वास हुआ था कि हम लोग यज्ञ नहीं करेंगे। एकदम बुझा थोड़ा भी धुआं भी नहीं निकल दिए। भगवान की कथा में होनी चाहिए। इस प्रकार की जो श्रद्धा हम लोग शास्त्रों में देखते हैं, ऐसी श्रद्धा के जगत में दिखाई नहीं देती। आदमी बहाना करना, कोई ये काम है, ये अपॉइंटमेंट है, यहाँ फोन करना है, वो करना है, ये करना है, वो करना है, आज भाई तबियत कुछ ठीक नहीं है, ये नहीं। श्रद्धा नहीं, क्योंकि भगवान की कथा में अनुराग नहीं है। और भगवान की कथा में अनुराग नहीं है, यह इस बात का द्योतक है कि भगवान में बिल्कुल प्रेम नहीं। भगवान में प्रेम होने पर व्यक्ति भगवान के विषय में सुनना चाहेगा, रात दिन सुनना चाहेगा। यदि भगवत कथा का अनुभव किया, भगवान का प्रेमी कोई आ जाए तो उसके मुख से भगवान का संदेश, उनका गुण सुनना ही है। तो मैंने शरण के ऋषिजन अपनी श्रद्धा भी व्यक्त कर रहे हैं और शुद्ध गोस्वामी के गुणों का क्वालिफिकेशन उसका उल्लेख कर रहे हैं। इस प्रकार पूछे, कैसे पूछे? आदर से पूछे। आदर का अर्थ श्रद्धा भी होता है, आदर का अर्थ लालसा भी होता है। बहुत लालसा से शुद्ध गोस्वामी का सम्मान करते हुए पूछे। ऐसे उनका सम्मान कर चुके थे, पहले से ही कुशल संभाषण किए थे, कुशल पूछे थे, या उनको खिलाए पिलाए अच्छा से, वे आराम कर लिए। जब बैठे थे एक दिन, उन लोगों के आग्रह से वे आसन पर बैठे। इसके पूर्व शब्द कृतम शब्द से समझ लेना चाहिए कि किस तरह से उनको बैठाए होंगे, आचरण करके, कथा करिए, करिए, तो बैठ गए। आसीनम, सत्कृतम और आसीनम, उनका सत्कार करके अपनी श्रद्धा व्यक्त करके उनको आसन पर बैठाए और इस प्रकार आदर से पूछे। ऋषि लोग पूछते हैं, त्वया खलु पुराणानि सेतिहासानि चान्य आख्यातान्यप्यतीतानि वेद्विदः श्रेष्ठो भगवान् बादरायण अन्ये च मुनयः श्रुतपरावर्विदो विदुः वेत्थातं सौम्य तत्सर्वं तत्तस्तदनुग्रहात् लोयो शुद्धस्य शिष्यस्य गुरवो गुह्यमर्पितः। तीन श्लोकों का संबंध करेंगे, समय तीनों पर है। ऋषि लोग कहते हैं, जिनमें सौनक के प्रधान है। तो कभी कभी तो भगवान विद्यास देवी कहते हैं सौनक उवाच। वास्तविक बात ये थी कि बात में इससे लिया गया कि और ऋषि लोग नहीं पूछेंगे, एक चुन लीजिए पूछने के लिए। तो सौनक जो पूछते थे ऋषि को बिना वो प्रधान थे। लेकिन अभी शुरू में पूछना है तो सारी ऋषि की आवाज एक साथ निकल, सब अपनी श्रद्धा व्यक्त कर रहे हैं। वैसे नहीं और लोग बोल रहे हैं और श्रद्धा चुपचाप किया, वो नहीं रहे तो हम क्या, सब लोग बोले। इसलिए ऋषि जब बोले, त्वया खलु पुराणानि सेतिहासानि आख्यातान्यप्यतीतानि धर्मशास्त्राणि यद्यथा। श्रीमद् गोस्वामी के मुख कमल से कृष्ण कथा का आस्वादन करने के लिए ऋषि जब सबसे पहले उनकी सर्वज्ञता और विद्वता का निरूपण कर रहे हैं, उनके ज्ञानातिशय को व्यक्त कर रहे हैं। हे अमर, हे निष्पाप सुखेश्वर, सबसे पहला संबोधन है अमर। अघ का अपराध, पाप, कपट। हे अनर, हे निष्पाप, हे निष्कपट, हे निरपराध, हे शुद्ध गोस्वामी, आपका जीवन परम निर्मम है। आपने जीवन में कोई अपराध नहीं किया, गुरुजनों का या भगवान का या साधुओं का। आपने कोई अपराध नहीं किया, आपने कोई कपट नहीं किया। उनकी कपटता का
जवाब दे दो भाई, टाइम नहीं है।
यहाँ निष्कपट का ऑनर का निष्कपट
जवाब दे दो।
कोई व्यक्ति उस पर प्रवचन करता है, प्रवचन और व्याख्यान करने से ज्ञान का गहरा अनुभव होता जाता है और अधिक अनुभव होता है। ये देखा गया है। अतः शुद्ध गोस्वामी के ज्ञानातिशयता का वर्णन कर रहे हैं कि आपने व्याख्यान दे दिया है, प्रवचन भी किया है पुराणों पर, महाभारत पर और मनुस्मृति, जागवल स्मृति, पराशर स्मृति आदि धर्म शास्त्रों पर। आपने खूब अच्छा से व्याख्यान दिया है, खूब अच्छा से पढ़ा है। ये बात कहते हैं कि ज्ञान वेद विदाम श्रेष्ठ भगवान वादरायण अन्य जमुनिया सुंदर बराबर विदो। हे शुद्ध गोस्वामी, विदाम श्रेष्ठ, ज्ञानियों में सर्वश्रेष्ठ भगवान वेदव्यास देव, ज्ञानियों में सर्वश्रेष्ठ अथवा वेद जानने वालों में सर्वश्रेष्ठ जो भी है भगवान वेदव्यास देव जो जानते हैं, ज्ञानी जिन पुराणों को, जिन ग्रंथों को भगवान वेदव्यास देव जानते हैं, उन्होंने लिखा है। समस्त ग्रंथों को पढ़ाता भगवान वेदव्यास पुराणों के और महाभारत के ज्ञानी वेद विदाम श्रेष्ठ भगवान वादरायण बराबर विदो। भगवान वेदव्यास देव जिन ग्रंथों को जानते हैं, जिन विषयों को पूरा पूरा जानते हैं, भगवान अन्य ऋषि में जो कुछ भी जानते हैं,
मास्क तो पहना ही है उसके बर्तन के लिए
उन समस्त ग्रंथों को, उन समस्त विषयों को आप जानते हैं। भगवान वेदव्यास देव जो जानते हैं उसको भी जानते हैं और अन्य ऋषि लोग जो जानते हैं वो सभी आप जानते हैं। अन्य चाहे शुद्ध बराबर अन्य ऋषियों के विषय में ऋषि कह रहे बराबर विदो, बराबर विदो कौन है? कौन है? निर्गुण और अगर का सगुण अथवा निर्गुण सगुण, सगुण अगुण। इसका अर्थ है कि भगवान के स्वरूप को, सगुण और निर्गुण को जानने वाले ऋषि लोग जो जानते हैं वो सब कुछ आप जानते हैं। सगुण निर्गुण का क्या अर्थ है? वास्तव में भगवान निर्गुण है, प्रकृति के गुणों से, सत्व, रज और तम से भगवान परे हैं, तो उनको उस समझ